In just 5 minutes and 23 seconds, 4 classified MOD documents changed everything. Starmer didn't expect deployment details. He expected routine foreign policy questions. Cameras caught his panic. The Commons watched him crumble. What did I reveal about Labour's secret Ukraine military plans that left Britain's Prime Minister speechless? At exactly 12:15 p.m. on the 9th of April, 2025, the House of Commons was about to witness the most explosive defense confrontation since the Iraq War vote. I walked to the dispatch box like a defense secretary armed with classified intelligence that would end a government's credibility on military policy. At the front bench, Prime Minister Keir Starmer sat rigidly beside Defense Secretary John Healey, his red folder suddenly feeling inadequate for the constitutional storm heading their way. I adjusted my navy blazer and placed a leather portfolio on the dispatch box containing 127 pages of classified Ministry of Defense correspondence that would expose Labour's Ukraine policy as reckless military adventurism. Mr. Speaker, I began, I want to ask the Prime Minister about his government's Ukraine deployment plans and some very concerning military commitments that raise serious questions about this government's transparency with Parliament on matters of war and peace. Starmer's team had prepared for questions about aid packages, not forensic analysis of classified military operations. Mr. Speaker, Starmer replied steadily, this government remains committed to supporting Ukraine's fight for freedom, while ensuring British forces are deployed only with full parliamentary oversight and public support. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talks about parliamentary oversight. I interrupted sharply, but I have here classified MOD planning documents showing Operation Tempest Shield, a secret deployment of 8,500 British combat troops to western Ukraine, scheduled to begin on May 15, 2025. I opened my portfolio and removed a document bearing MOD classification stamps. This classified briefing document, dated the 22nd of March, 2025, from the Chief of Defense Staff to the Prime Minister, explicitly outlines what military planners call direct ground engagement protocols for British forces operating in active combat zones. The revelation detonated like a military bombshell. 8,500 combat troops in Ukrainian war zones violated every principle of parliamentary oversight. Conservative MPs erupted while Labour MPs sat in shocked silence. Mr. Speaker, Starmer replied, stress betraying in his voice, the government conducts routine military planning exercises for various contingencies according to established defense protocols. Mr. Speaker, routine military planning does not include detailed casualty projection models showing an estimated 340 British military deaths in the first 6 months of Operation Tempest Shield. The chamber erupted as MPs processed the implications. This wasn't contingency planning, Faye. This was active preparation for major military engagement, resulting in hundreds of British deaths without parliamentary authorization. But I wasn't finished with my military evidence. I had additional correspondence that would expand the scandal beyond secret deployments to include financial commitments that struck at the heart of Britain's fiscal sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, I said, removing another document from my portfolio, I want to ask the Prime Minister about the financial commitments his government has made to support Operation Tempest Shield without Treasury approval or parliamentary authorization. The shift to unauthorized financial commitments sent another shockwave through the chamber. Starmer's face immediately flushed as he realized military spending was about to be discussed in terms that could trigger constitutional crises. Mr. Speaker, Starmer replied, his voice already showing panic. All military expenditure is subject to established Treasury procedures and parliamentary scrutiny through the appropriate select committees. Mr. Speaker, I replied with surgical precision, Treasury internal audit documents show unauthorized military commitments totaling £12.7 billion for Operation Tempest Shield, including £4.2 billion for what MOD documents describe as combat readiness acceleration payments. The disclosure created another constitutional earthquake. Over £12 billion in unauthorized military spending violated every principle of parliamentary control over public finances and military operations. Mr. Speaker, according to National Audit Office preliminary findings obtained this morning, these payments bypass normal Treasury approval processes through what officials call emergency operational protocols that have never been authorized by Parliament. At 12:20 p.m., exactly 5 minutes into questioning, both Starmer and Defense Secretary Healey experienced simultaneous political panic. Starmer's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass, while Healey frantically whispered with military advisors, searching for explanations that could justify planning major war without parliamentary approval. Mr. Speaker, these allegations are completely without foundation, Starmer whispered. This government has made no military commitments that exceed our constitutional obligations to Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I replied, Operation Tempest Shield deployment orders have already been issued to the 3rd UK Division, the 16th Air Assault Brigade, and RAF Tornado Squadrons, with advance units scheduled to deploy on the 25th of April. Meanwhile, the scandal was expanding to implicate broader government foreign policy, as my evidence revealed coordination between multiple departments in what appeared to be the most serious constitutional crisis over military power since the Suez debacle. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister confirm that Operation Tempest Shield planning includes provisions for British forces to engage Russian military units in direct combat operations? The question forced Starmer to either admit to planning war with a nuclear power or acknowledge ignorance of his own government's military operations, both answers potentially ending any prime ministership. Mr. Speaker, British forces operate according to international law and NATO protocols, Starmer replied weakly, but his evasion only made the scandal worse. But I had my final piece of evidence that would make any government claims of constitutional propriety completely untenable. I removed the smoking gun from my portfolio documentation that would trigger immediate parliamentary debates about war powers and potentially criminal proceedings. Mr. Speaker, I have here signal communications between the Prime Minister's private office and Ukrainian military commanders, discussing specific British unit deployments and coordination of combat operations against Russian positions. The revelation of direct communications with foreign military commanders about British combat operations represented the ultimate breach of parliamentary sovereignty and democratic oversight of military power. Furthermore, I continued, delivering the final blow, these communications include Downing Street confirmation that Operation Tempest Shield would proceed, regardless of parliamentary approval, because national security requires executive decision-making. The chamber descended into chaos as MPs processed the full scale of what had been revealed. The British government hadn't just planned secret military deployments, FATI had systematically bypassed Parliament to commit British forces to a major war that could trigger nuclear escalation. Conservative MPs were on their feet demanding immediate government resignation. Labour MPs sat in stunned silence as the magnitude of constitutional fraud became clear. The Speaker's calls for order were drowned out by military outrage that reverberated through Westminster's ancient halls. At 12:22 p.m., after exactly 7 minutes of questioning, both Starmer and Healey experienced complete ministerial collapse. Starmer buried his face in his hands, his prime ministerial authority disintegrating in real time. Healey stared blankly at his notes, knowing that military scandal of this magnitude typically destroyed entire governments. Mr. Speaker, I concluded with the authority of someone presenting evidence to a war crimes tribunal. Based on this evidence, the Prime Minister has systematically deceived Parliament about military deployments, committed British forces to combat operations without authorization, and violated every principle of democratic oversight of military power. Speaker Hoyle, recognizing that normal parliamentary procedures were inadequate for allegations of this gravity, called for an immediate suspension. The House will suspend for 30 minutes, while I consider the constitutional implications of the evidence presented for military governance and parliamentary sovereignty. The suspension was unprecedented for PMQs, but necessary given allegations that went to the heart of Britain's constitutional relationship between civilian government and military power. As cameras captured every moment, Starmer and Healey remained frozen at the front bench, their military authority obliterated, and their government's defense credibility exposed as systematic deception and constitutional fraud. Within minutes, social media exploded with footage of the prime ministerial breakdown. Operation Tempest Shield trended worldwide within 10 minutes, generating constitutional controversy. NATO headquarters expressed concern about unauthorized British military commitments. The Ministry of Defense suspended 3 senior planning officers, pending investigation. The Russian Ministry of Defense described Operation Tempest Shield as direct NATO aggression and threatened appropriate military responses to British combat deployments. The political earthquake continued for weeks as defense analysts investigated systematic military planning without parliamentary oversight. My evidence had exposed coordination between civilian and military leadership that corrupted democratic governance of military power. The PMQs session became required viewing in constitutional law courses, demonstrating how parliamentary oversight can expose governmental military deception and protect democratic control over matters of war and peace. Sometimes the strongest weapon against military authoritarianism isn't constitutional theory, it is documentary evidence perfectly timed, when war planning has nowhere to hide. What happens when prime ministerial lies meet parliamentary scrutiny? Keir Starmer learned these lessons when forensic analysis revealed that some war plans are too well documented to deny. This dramatized account explores themes of parliamentary oversight, military accountability, and democratic control of armed forces. All dialogue and specific incidents are fictionalized for analytical purposes while addressing real concerns about civilian control of military power and constitutional governance of defense policy.